order tonight's meeting of the City of Eugene Budget Committee, the February 12th, 2025 hybrid meeting at 5:33 p.m. A few housekeeping notes. Anyone wishing to access this meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling in to one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the City of Eugene's Budget Committee webcasts and agendas webpage. For those who joined the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically turned off when you enter the meeting as an attendee. This is our first in-person meeting in 5 years. Yay! Wonderful to see everyone here in person, committee members and audience included. It is also the staff's first meeting managing the technology in this room, so please provide grace as we settle into our new space. And I just want to, on my behalf, say that it's a privilege to be here and a privilege to be able to participate in these proceedings. Thank you to everyone who is able to spend 3 hours this evening with us. I want to also be mindful of the fact that not everyone in our community can do so. Not everyone shares that privilege of being able to participate in proceedings such as this. And in a great many cases, the decisions that we make here may have the most impact on those who are least able to participate. So as always, I ask our committee to keep that in mind as we go through all of our proceedings. Tonight, there will be time in the agenda for public comment. Comments should be limited to the capital improvement program. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't yet registered, please submit a form via the link provided on the Budget Committee webcasts and agendas webpage. The online form closes at 5:35. The first portion of this meeting will provide an overview of the proposed 2025 to 2031 Capital Improvement Program, CIP. The CIP is a 6-year capital plan that is the result of policies and public input in the various capital programs across the city. The first 2 years of the CIP will become the capital budget for the 2025 to 27 biennium. In the second half of the meeting, we'll discuss the Oregon property tax challenges that have contributed to the general fund structural gap we are currently addressing. Due to our full agenda, comments and questions tonight should be limited to agenda items. We have 4 meetings coming up that will provide time to discuss the city's financial condition and proposed budget. I want to welcome our mayor to her first budget committee meeting in her capacity, as well as former citizen member Elijah Kaczynski, now joining us in her first budget meeting as a city councilor. And I also want to toss to new member Wendy Simmons for a brief opportunity to introduce yourself, since it's your first meeting with us.
Thank you. Oh,
You have to hit the button.
is it on?
Oh, it's on.
It is on. I didn't have to hit the button. I'm Wendy Simmons, and I work at Lane Community College in their health and PE department. And I've been there for 27 years, and I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Minutes from the May 22nd, 2024 meeting were sent out. Did anyone have any recommended changes or comments on those? Seeing none, does anyone have a motion to approve those minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
I have a motion from Zach Mulholland, seconded by Councilor Kaczynski. All in favor?
Aye.
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 I'm struggling a little to count votes between the members we have online and in the room, but did
I
staff,
see Councilor Gross' hand raised.
was staff able to get a count on that? Thank you. That the minutes are approved, and we can now begin public comment on the 2025 to 2031 proposed capital improvement program. Those wishing to speak during public comment must have registered virtually or in the lobby as they arrived this evening. The period to register has ended. Comments should be focused on the CIP at this time. There will be time at future Budget Committee meetings for general budget comments. The meeting moderator will announce 2 speakers at a time. When it's your turn, your name will be announced. If you're virtual, you'll be promoted to a panelist in Zoom, and you will need to accept the invite before you can unmute yourself and provide your comments. If you're in person, please come forward to the speakers table, and you'll have to use the button to turn your mic on, just like we do. And all speakers should preface their statement with their name, city of residence, and for Eugene residents, your ward if known. How many people do we have signed up? 1 person signed up. In that case, there will be 3 minutes for comment, and the timer will begin flashing red when you have 15 seconds remaining. When your time is concluded, the moderator will mute your microphone and move on to the next speaker, in theory. And we have 1 person signed up.
Yikes, I'm the only one. Good evening, Budget Committee and staff. It's an honor to be here. On. Is it on now? Yes. It was on. Okay. Pretty cool. My name is Eric Jura. I live in Ward 6. I don't know if Councilor Evans is here, but if he is, a shout out to him. Also a shout out to Ty. He and I see each other occasionally at Active Bethel community meetings, so I wanted to say that. Couple of things I wanted to mention. One was, before I get to that, I'm also on the airport advisory committee, and I'll speak to that in terms of the budget here in just a moment. The other thing I would like to say, just very, very briefly, is that I was a 25-year resident of Jackson County, Oregon. I'm now a Jackson County, Oregon refugee. I live here in Eugene, and I'm glad to be here, and it's a very unique place to be. And one of the things that makes it unique is how you employ your budget committee. It's very different from my experience. I served on 3 different budget committees there, a lot more public involvement. Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. I really appreciate it. It's really fantastic. Onto the actual budget stuff. It's been my honor to serve on the Airport Advisory Committee for over a year now. Shout out to Catherine Stevens, who's here, and we had a meeting today. And I was looking over and we get a lot of information about capital improvement in our monthly meetings and so forth. Had an opportunity to review it again here in the budget document. And just want to say, I'm the Bethel representative on the committee. Just wanted to say I think it's a fantastic organization. The information that we're presented, the way it's done, the professionalism, the enthusiasm that they show meeting with us every month and so forth is just fantastic. And I think I feel very valued as a member of that committee. I think all the other committee members do too. So just a shout out for them. I think it's a fantastic asset for the city and of course for the entire region. So I wish you great good luck in your discussions and your deliberations. So thank you very much.
Thank you. With public comment concluded, we can move on to agenda item 4, the staff presentation on proposed CIP. So come on up, staff.
All right, thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, how about now? Is that better? Okay, great. Thanks again and good evening, everyone. My name is Keisha Edison. I am a senior financial analyst in Central Finance. With me today are Jennifer Willer, the city engineer, and Jeff Perry, our facilities director. I'll start tonight's presentation with an overview of the capital improvement program, and then I'll turn it over to Jeff and Jennifer to give detail on their respective departments. The Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, accomplishes a number of purposes. The CIP is a multi-year planning document that serves as a roadmap for the city's capital projects for fiscal years 26 to 31. It is also a budget document. Once it is approved, these projects become the city's capital budget for the next biennium. In this case, the 2025 to 2031 CIP will be the basis of the 2025-2027 capital budget. Capital projects are resource intensive and require significant advanced planning to execute. Therefore, a multi-year capital plan is considered best practice for local governments, and the CIP process helps us balance our capital plans with available funding, communicate upcoming capital needs, and connect our spending with goals and the community's needs. This diagram shows the basic process through which a project goes from idea to construction to use. Throughout the process, there are multiple sources of input that inform city staff on the needs and desires of the community and drive forward the capital planning process. First, a capital need is identified and analyzed through a variety of planning and modeling efforts. These efforts are typically documented through master plans, and these plans may be developed with engagement from the public and council. For example, the Transportation System Plan had extensive public engagement due to the wide-ranging implications to city policies, regulations, and project priorities. In the next step of the planning process, more detailed project plans are made in collaboration with engineering and design teams, partner agencies, and further input from the community. Funding options, including qualifying grant opportunities, are also identified in this phase. Once funding and project plans are in place, the CIP is compiled and presented to the Budget Committee, which creates another opportunity for members of the public to weigh in. Then, City Council approves the CIP in March, and the capital projects in the first 2 years receive appropriation authority for the proposed biennial budget. After budget adoption, the next phase of planning, design, and building can begin, and the cycle starts anew for future capital projects. Each cycle, city staff continued to seek opportunities to improve the CIP process. This year, the most noticeable change to the CIP is the format in which the document is being presented. In order to achieve greater efficiencies and provide a better product to the community, the city has transitioned the CIP document to the same interactive online platform that we use for the city's biennial budget. Though the CIP document looks slightly different this year, all previously provided content has been retained and new content has been added to increase understanding of planned capital projects. This new content includes dynamic individual project maps, an upcoming biennial capital plan summary, and detailed breakdowns of funding sources per project by source and year, as well as increased functionality for viewers of the document. Another new feature available this year is an interactive online map of CIP projects created by GIS staff in Public Works Engineering and located on the city's website. This map allows users to view plottable CIP projects geospatially, to view street-level detail of project locations, and to see individual project details and descriptions within the map interface. In addition to other improvements, we are continuing to dial in on estimates of greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs, as well as project-specific and operating cost reporting. In the 2025-2031 CIP, a total of approximately 42,000 GHGs are currently estimated to result from the construction of projects. GHG emission details can be found within the document, along with information about the city's continued efforts toward reducing emissions and decarbonation of city buildings, which Jennifer and Jeff will also share with you today. Increased project-specific reporting was implemented in previous CIPs in order to improve transparency. This year's CIP continues that effort with a total of 129 projects and programs identified and 102 locations viewable in the interactive map. Finally, staff attempt to estimate operating costs related to capital projects to improve budget planning, as well as communication with you and our community. In many cases, projects in the CIP are in early phase development, and estimating operating costs at this point in time is not feasible. Cost estimates for such projects are expected to appear in future CIPs or budgets. Where possible, operating costs have been estimated and included in the CIP. In the table, you will see the total additional annual operating costs estimated from CIP projects. In FY '27, we anticipate about $1.2 million in new annual ongoing operating expenses. This estimate increases to about $4.9 million ongoing after the completion of the airport expansion projects in the later years of the CIP. Operating costs resulting from airport projects make up about 86% of this total. These operating costs are accounted for in funds outside of the general fund and are not part of the general fund gap. Rather, airport operating expenses are fully supported by airline rates and charges and non-airline related revenue. The remaining 14% of additional estimated operating expenses are from parks and open space projects. These operating costs are typically supported by the Parks and Recreation operating levy. However, operating costs not covered by the current levy will need support from another revenue source, such as a future levy. These expenditures are also now eligible for stormwater utility support. Our total proposed 2025-2031 CIP capital plan equals $481.2 million, and this chart shows how the proposed CIP funds are divided into 6 functional program areas. This total does not include the $4.9 million in expected annual operating costs shown on the previous slide. You will note that Airport has the largest portion of the CIP, with 10 projects totaling $298.1 million. The bulk of this amount is associated with the Concourse C addition project. Transportation has the second largest program area, with 38 projects totaling $89.7 million, most of which are funded by the 2022 voter-approved street bond. Also of note, airport and transportation projects account for the majority of estimated GHG emissions from project construction. Our capital projects are funded in a multitude of ways. This graph shows the variety of funding sources for the $481.2 million in anticipated capital funding. It is important to remember that most capital project funding comes from sources that are restricted to particular uses, such as the street bond funding for transportation projects or federal and state grants, and that this funding cannot be used for other purposes such as general fund operating expenses. As you see in the chart, the Airport Construction Fund is by far the largest source of funding for the CIP. This fund is fully supported by airport revenues, and no general fund capital is required for airport projects. The second largest funding source comes through grants from the FAA, followed by the street bond approved by voters in 2022. As mentioned, both of these sources have very specific guidelines and restrictions on use of funds. Other funding source restrictions are outlined in the Reader's Guide section of the CIP document. This slide displays the total capital costs included in the CIP for the upcoming 2025-27 biennium by program area and funding source. You'll note that grant funding supports about half of the capital cost, and much like the full 6-year CIP, airport and transportation projects make up the largest shares by program area. Some projects in the upcoming biennium are anticipated to be funded by an airport revenue bond. This financing plan is in development, and associated projects and financing options will be brought back in front of council in the coming months for approval. Now going to turn it over to Jeff Perry, our Facilities Director, to talk about public buildings and facilities capital projects.
All right, hello. I'm here to review the capital improvement plan for public buildings and related capital projects. The city manages a wide range of public facilities, including police and fire stations, community centers, swimming pools, parking structures, historic properties, libraries, performing arts centers, and City Hall. In total, the city maintains almost 200 buildings encompassing over 2 million square feet. Beyond maintaining existing facilities, the city also focuses on planning, constructing, and expanding new facilities to address the needs of the community. Maintenance and preservation efforts are primarily funded by the general fund, while major renovations and new construction rely on dedicated and external funding sources, such as the recent Parks and Rec bond and urban renewal funds. Public buildings and facilities projects are derived from several adopted plans and regulations that guide our work. These include the facility condition assessment, the Parks and Rec system plan, the parking structure condition analysis, the climate recovery ordinance, ADA requirements, and LEED sustainable design standards for major construction projects. Capital improvement projects for general fund facilities fall under three main categories. Facility preservation and maintenance. These projects preserve, maintain, and repair systems associated with existing facilities and are allocated within the following program areas: annual exterior preservation and maintenance, annual flooring and interior upgrades, hazardous remediation, parking lot and pavement maintenance, small re-roofing projects, contingency and emergency projects, and then planned repair projects. Examples of projects in these categories include roofing and siding replacement, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing repairs, painting, fire suppression system maintenance, and building controls and lighting upgrades. General site and facility improvements. Projects in this category include modifications or additions to existing facilities to meet operational, safety, and cost efficiency goals and to comply with ADA standards or ADA guidelines. The primary goal of this category is to address changing program area functions and to improve service delivery. New capital projects. New capital facilities. Projects in this category typically provide for either new or replacement facilities or projects that expand existing facilities and services and are of such a scale to warrant classification as standalone projects. Large-scale facility changes that are needed to provide for community growth are found in this category of projects. Examples of these types of projects include the recent City Hall renovation and construction of the Farmers Market Pavilion. The CIP includes approximately $32 million allocated for the city's buildings and structures, with about $9 million dedicated for preservation and maintenance of general fund facilities. Next, I'll discuss some accomplishments and projects the CIP will focus on during the FY 25 through 27 fiscal year. Roofing replacement and exterior repair projects are always a very high priority for the capital budget, since failing systems can cause extensive damage to many other systems, which lead to much higher repair and replacement costs. Several major roofing projects were completed over the last fiscal year, including roofing replacement at the Eugene Library, Fire Station 1, and Fire Station 11. Roofing replacement at the library was particularly expensive due to the complexity of the project and large HVAC equipment that had to be removed and reinstalled using a crane. Needed siding and exterior repairs were also made to Fire Station 2. Projects planned for in the upcoming CIP include roofing replacement at Fire Station 10, the Emergency Services Training Facility, Fire Logistics Facility, Police Services Building, and the Graham Field House. And exterior repairs and window replacement are scheduled for the EPD headquarters facility. The climate recovery ordinance and decarbonization of public buildings is an ongoing priority for the capital fund. Electrification of HVAC systems, LED upgrades, the replacement of R22 refrigerant, and the implementation of building automation systems are routine projects the capital improvement program funds. In 2023, the HVAC system was replaced and upgraded at the Boys and Girls Club Ed Coleman Center facility, along with the replacement of the roof. The new system not only added air conditioning to the gymnasium, which was a very high priority for the Boys and Girls Club program, but it also helped reduce energy use and carbon emissions. Additionally, the system features enhanced filtration to help maintain fresh air in the facility during wildfire events. Other climate recovery projects completed include envelope improvements to the Peterson Barn Community Center and replacement of gas-fired heating equipment at Fire Station 1 and Fire Station 11. Planning is currently underway to convert smaller gas units to heat pumps at the Emergency Services Training Facility. There were also a number of large accessibility-related projects completed over the last fiscal year. This included kitchen and restroom upgrades at Peterson Barn, replacement of the west stairs at the Overpark Garage, along with concrete repairs and accessibility improvements at City Hall. In In fact, the facility design and construction team came up with a creative and cost-effective solution to bring the plaza and access to council chambers compliant with ADA by utilizing stained concrete that designates a path that meets slope requirements for accessibility, which you can see in the photo to the right. Although they are generally smaller projects and don't always receive a great deal of attention, the CIP also funds numerous flooring replacement and repair projects. The hardwood floors at Morse Family Farm were recently refinished, and flooring upgrades were made to Peterson Barn Community Center. New projects will be scheduled on an as-needed basis over the course of the fiscal year. Capital funds are used to improve resiliency, safety, and security both for the public and city staff. Recently completed projects include backup power upgrades and repairs at the Central Lane 911 Center and City Hall. New backup generators were also installed at several fire stations to help avoid interruption of emergency services during power outages. Fire alarm and security system upgrades have occurred at multiple recreation facilities along with the Public Works Roosevelt Yard and City Hall. Although the CIP focuses on preservation and maintenance and long-term planning to ensure, preventative maintenance and long-term planning to ensure building systems are replaced before they fail, emergency projects are still common and often need to be addressed immediately. During the summer of 2023, staff discovered that the Holt Center's 40-year-old waste lines were beginning to fail prematurely. In coordination with Cultural Services, Facilities was able to develop a scope of work and hire a contractor under short notice to complete the emergency repairs while the theater was dark. The contingency project, funded by CIP dollars, helped avoid shutting the facility down unexpectedly and losing a substantial amount of revenue. Examples of other contingency projects include emergency waste line repairs at the Graham Field House, replacement of a large pump at Amazon Pool, structural beam repairs at Fire Station 11, and the replacement of the roof at the Boys and Girls Club Ed Coleman Center facility. Although the Public Works Roosevelt Yard campus falls outside of the general fund CIP, facility supports capital preservation and maintenance projects and planning work at the critically important site, which houses Public Works maintenance, fleet, and parks and open space. One noteworthy project led by Public Works staff will focus on significant energy efficiency upgrades. Utilizing an energy savings performance contract, the Roosevelt site will undergo LED lighting upgrades and the installation of photovoltaic systems on multiple buildings, paired with an on-site battery storage system for backup power. These upgrades will not only reduce energy consumption and carbon emissions, but also enhance the site's resiliency. A substantial portion of the project will be funded by a $1 million Community Renewable Energy Grant administered by the Oregon Department of Energy. City Hall. In July of 2023, the city purchased eWeb's headquarters facility for the purposes of a new city hall. The project included new paint and finishes, carpet replacement, renovation of the north building for the council chambers, along with needed repairs to the building's HVAC, electrical, and fire life safety systems. Seismic and security upgrades were also made to the building. In addition to technological improvements, the council chamber features a unique ceiling grid that's constructed of repurposed cedar from the old City Hall facility. Also worth noting, Facilities performed all of the programming and architectural design work in-house, which would normally be contracted or outsourced, along with major upgrades to the building's HVAC digital control system, which was performed by technicians on the facilities team. In total, the work performed by staff saved the project over $1 million. Staff recently completed a condition assessment of city facilities. The pie chart in this slide illustrates the type of deficiencies based on project categories. Representing almost 70% of total deficiencies, building system repairs and replacement are the highest priority projects for CIP funds. These projects often include roofing replacement, siding replacement, and major building system repairs that are required for a facility to function. The chart in this slide illustrates deficiencies based on how critical preservation and maintenance work is needed. Deficiencies classified as critical and potentially critical are generally called out as specific projects in the CIP and actively being worked on or planned for. This represents roughly $9 million in CIP projects, with another $30 million which should be addressed within the next 6 years and beyond. Now I'll hand it over to Jennifer to talk about public works projects.
All right. Thank you. So again, my name is Jennifer Willer. I am the city engineer, and I'm going to be presenting on the 5 areas that the CIP covers in public works. So that's the airport, parks and open space, stormwater, transportation, and wastewater. While I am able to answer probably a lot of questions, I also have with me Catherine Stevens and Stephanie Picotte from the airport, and Craig Carnegie and Catherine Burke from Parks and Open Space to answer any questions that you have after I go through this pretty quick overview of a lot of information. All right, so this list includes some of the most common guides and plans that either list or guide project selection. Each service area also includes specific plans and guides, but these are some that you'll see influencing all of the service areas. In the Reader's Guide section of the CIP document, there is a comprehensive list of guides and plans, including information about when they were last updated, when they will next be updated, and opportunities for public engagement on those updates. This is the best way for the public to participate in the project selection process, as it can be, or it can take many years to obtain funding and prepare a project for construction. The prioritization of a project often takes place in these long-range planning documents long before the project is shown in a budget document such as the CIP. One thing to keep in mind when reviewing the public works portion of the CIP, a relatively small $3.4 million of the $449.4 million is general capital fund. The remaining $446 million of the public works capital improvement projects are funded from regulated or dedicated revenue sources. For example, many of the projects are specifically identified and required by a voter-approved funding measure that listed the specific projects to be completed, or in city council-approved project lists associated with those funding measures. In addition to considerations about dedicated revenue sources, additional project selection criteria includes addressing regulatory or permit requirements, eliminating or mitigating hazards, and addressing excessive maintenance and operational costs. We also consider equity across the community, both distributive equity and considering historic underspending. Another consideration is to address the protection of natural resources. And finally, we routinely consider opportunities to leverage city funds. Many of our projects obtain grants, and many of those grants have a 10 to 20% local match requirement. And while grant projects come with their own complexities, these grants do allow for the construction of projects we otherwise wouldn't be able to afford and allows the funding to be stretched further. So first up is the airport portion of the CIP. The COVID-19 pandemic had far-reaching implications, with severe reductions in passenger numbers and flight schedules for years. Eugene Airport has now fully recovered and is well above FY19 passenger numbers. Between 2019 to 2023, the Eugene Airport saw a 14% retention rate increase of local passengers who had previously been utilizing the Portland International Airport. Capital projects for the Eugene Airport are outlined in and structured by the Eugene Airport Master Plan and the 5-year Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, Capital Improvement Plan. These documents provide for planned development of airport property and facilities to accommodate future aviation demand while remaining compatible with the environment and community development. Project priorities are determined through a process based on the adopted master plan and FAA approval. And additionally, an advanced terminal planning study was completed in FY23 to direct the development of the Concourse C project, which was also identified in the overarching plans as necessary due to projected increased passenger demand. Looking at airport funding sources, the airport portion of the CIP is $298.1 million from dedicated airport fee and grant revenue sources funding 10 projects and programs. Future terminal expansion and enabling projects are assumed to need financing from a future revenue bond, as Keisha mentioned, and these costs are currently included as airport construction. There will be a city council, there'll be city council conversations later this year to discuss airport expansion and financing costs. The majority of greenhouse gas emissions at the airports are generated by aircraft and ground service vehicles, which are not under the control of the airport. The airport does look for opportunities to implement the Climate Recovery Ordinance and the CAP 2.0 and other sustainable practices into the actions in the facilities that we do control. The airport continues to look for opportunities to incorporate sustainable materials into all capital construction. Additionally, solar power was incorporated into the quick turnaround rental car facility, a project included in the prior CIP. Looking forward, the airport will be implementing improvements identified from an energy audit of airport facilities, incorporating green building techniques into concourse and terminal building construction, developing a microgrid resiliency plan, and completing an electric vehicle charging and renewable solar energy planning project. So I wanted to highlight a couple of categories of airport projects included in the CIP. The CIP includes $26.97 million in preservation and maintenance projects, including 2 airfield projects shown on this slide. This category of projects is focused on existing infrastructure and maximizing its longevity and use. Most of the airport CIP is in this category, with $263.33 million going towards upgrades and capacity enhancements, which are focused on providing facilities to service both the near-term and long-term capacity needs of the airport. Next up is Parks and Open Space. The Parks and Open Space Division, or POSE, stewards over 5,200 acres of land, approximately 4,300 acres of which are natural area parks. There are a lot of plans and guides that direct the Parks and Open Space projects shown in this CIP. The 2018 Picture Plan Play, a vision and implementation plan for Eugene's Parks and Recreation System, is the overarching plan, which lists specific park development projects and identifies relative priorities among the list of projects for over a 30-year planning period. On this POSE funding slide, this is where you find the capital general funds in Public Works of $3.4 million. The remainder of the total $25.1 million of POSE CIP funding for 18 capital projects and programs comes from dedicated revenue sources, with Parks System Development Charges, or SDCs, providing a majority of the funding. POSE activities around climate action and resilience are focused on reducing water usage, reducing energy usage, tree planting and other vegetated infrastructure, and incorporating sustainable materials into construction. So this is the larger category of POSE projects in the CIP, the construction of new capital facilities at $14.54 million. This category is made up of several Eugene Parks Foundation projects, the continuation of some large projects such as the Riverfront Plaza, and new capacity projects or phases of projects. POSE preservation and maintenance is the next largest category, and it's focused on existing infrastructure and maximizing its longevity and use. Projects include partnership projects, installation of donated items, and capital renovation and preservation of existing parks and sites. The next Public Works CIP category is capital stormwater. There is a long list of plans, guides, permits that direct the selection and prioritization of stormwater projects. In addition to city plans and guides, the stormwater program is highly regulated, which results in a lot of acronyms. And so as I was saying, this program is highly regulated and with permits such as the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System municipal stormwater permit, that's all one name, the Willamette Basin Total Maximum Daily Load Implementation Plan, and both of those two items heavily influence the projects in the CIP. The funding sources for stormwater capital are dedicated sources in the amount of $16.1 million for 21 projects and programs in the proposed CIP, with user fees making up most of the revenue. The climate action work for the capital stormwater program is focused on creating a more resilient system with capacity for changing and emergency conditions. This work includes the restoration of existing infrastructure and waterways, reducing the impacts from impervious surfaces, and expanding vegetation and urban forestry benefits within the community. Stormwater functional and safety projects is the largest category of stormwater projects at $5.87 million, with projects focused on the preserving the functionality and operations of existing stormwater facilities. There are also several projects to address safety concerns, such as undermining of bridge structures and a feasibility study related to the removal of the Willamette River diversion dam to the mill race. Stormwater upgrades and capacity enhancements is the next largest category of capital stormwater projects at $4.35 million. These projects are about addressing capacity of existing stormwater systems and is very much focused on the climate resiliency goals. A significant number of the projects are to improve existing stormwater facilities and waterways to better withstand projected conditions and reduce the occurrence of and impacts from flooding. The next Public Works CIP category is transportation. Eugene's transportation system represents the city's most expensive asset with nearly 540 miles of paved streets, over 770 miles of sidewalks, and nearly 190 miles of on-street bike lanes and over 45 miles of off-street paths, along with all the signals, lighting, signing, and pavement markings that go along with all of these facilities. This is a list of the most common policies, plans, and guides that influence the selection of projects. I want to note that during the CIP period, the Transportation System Plan will be turning 10 years old and will be due for an update. Additionally, the state rulemaking known as Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities, or CFEC, has also directed the update of TSPs to be completed by the end of 2029. Formal public engagement activities are anticipated to be happening in 2027. The funding sources for the 38 transportation capital projects and programs shown in this proposed CIP are dedicated sources in the amount of $89.7 million, with funding from the 2022 street bond measure making up most of the revenue, with transportation SDCs and local gas tax about equal for the next biggest source. The TSP and CAP 2.0 drive the progress made and the opportunities to address climate action and resiliency. The CRO called for a 50% reduction in fossil fuel usage, and the TSP built upon that by adding a goal to triple the number of trips made by walking, bicycling, and using transit. And nearly every transportation project in the CIP includes elements related to these policies and plans, from the construction of active transportation facilities, adding safety and efficiency features for all travelers, and the use of construction materials and methods with lower embodied greenhouse gas emissions than more traditional methods and materials. The largest transportation CIP category is preservation and maintenance at $70.29 million, with the 2022 street bond measure 20-333 making up most of this. The remaining amount is primarily from the local gas tax, which is 5 cents per gallon, which is used for local street repairs and slurry seals, street preservation often related to bond measure projects but not specifically named in the bond measure, and matching funds for grant-funded projects. Upgrades and capacity enhancements is the next largest category and primarily includes the use of transportation SDCs to fund projects in the TSP, primarily as local match for grants. Functional and safety projects use the road fund gas tax distributed by the state. And while a vast majority of these funds go towards operations and maintenance, there is a portion that is used to fund capital programs shown on this slide. And finally, the wastewater portion of the CIP. Public Works operates and maintains over 800 miles of sanitary sewer pipes, including associated laterals in the right-of-way, manholes, and pump stations. The wastewater plans that have the most influence over project selection in the CIP have been the Wastewater Master Plan and plans regarding housing and development needs. The Wastewater Master Plan depicts how the system may be expanded to serve future housing and industrial development. And working closely with planning and community development divisions, we implement the Envision Eugene and housing implementation pipeline projects in order to select projects consistent with these plans. The wastewater CIP includes 15 capital projects and programs, which is primarily funded from 2 dedicated sources: the local wastewater system development charges, revenue, and users fees, for a total of $20.4 million. Climate action and resilience related to the wastewater program consists of preserving the existing system to reduce the intrusion of groundwater into the system, which leads to reduced capacity, increased energy usage, and increased treatment costs. Construction techniques such as rehabilitating the existing pipelines in place rather than open trench replacement leads to less construction time and impacts, as well as reduced waste materials. As described on the previous climate action slide, with $11.45 million over the course of the CIP going to this category. The new capital facilities category includes projects to support the capacity and expansion needed to serve both residential and industrial development. This CIP expands on the inclusion of the Crow Road wastewater extension in the last CIP by adding an initial phase of wastewater facilities to serve the Clear Lake area and Prairie Road south of Beltline, both serving industrial properties, and housing-related extensions in the Willow Creek 18th Avenue area and along key transportation corridors. And that concludes the Public Works portion of the CIP.
Recap, the 2025-2031 CIP includes a total of $481.2 million in capital spending over the next 6 years, with an estimated $4.9 million in added annual operating costs. When approved by council, the first 2 years of the CIP, which includes $192.6 million, will become the proposed 2025-2027 capital budget. City staff have continued to improve efficiencies and service delivery through a new online interactive document and map, as well as transparent GHG reporting where possible and detail for 129 individual projects and programs in this CIP. Capital program staff also continue to make progress on projects that support the city's climate action plan and seek new opportunities for increasing resiliency and building for the future. As we look at our process timeline, tonight, the Budget Committee will make a recommendation to Council regarding the proposed CIP. Council will then meet in mid-March to hold a public hearing and take action. Later this spring, the adopted CIP will serve as the basis for our capital program in the proposed 2025-2027 biennial budget. Lastly, I want to say thank you to City of Eugene staff who helped put this document together. There were many employees from across the organization who worked exceptionally hard to create the capital plan, to ensure a smooth implementation of new features, and to make the CIP as complete and transparent as possible. Thank you for your time and attention this evening, and with that, I'll turn it back over to our chair.
Thank you so much for that presentation. And this now makes it our opportunity to ask questions or offer comments upon the capital improvement plan that has been put forth before we make a recommendation to advance the CIP to the City Council. For this, I'm going to do it the hybrid round robin by working down the table with committee members, the table across from me. Then I'm going to turn to our members joining us online. Then I'm going to work up this side of the table with members that are here in person. And then I'm going to, after I've gone, I'll toss to the mayor as a non-voting guest to give any input she has. And each person will have 3 minutes to comment. So that means we're going to start off with Wendy Simmons.
I'm new. Just one question I have to start is if it's already been in a bond or a levy that is set, it's not like that can be changed, correct? Or
So, yeah, I think if you're thinking of like the street repair bond, yeah, so there were a specific list of projects in that bond measure that voters voted on, and so those are set. The way it's written, council could add projects to that list if they wanted, after all the funds and projects were complete.
That's all I have right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Kaczynski.
Thank you so much for the presentation and all your work on it. I had a couple of comments and questions. First, I wanted to note that there's been a couple of plans on that list of plans that I've looked at every year and been like, that was last updated in the 90s. And I was pleased to see that all of those plans now have update goals within the next year or two. So I'm glad that all of our plans will pretty soon have been updated in a millennia that starts with 2 instead of 1. So thank you for that. I noticed in the document that there were some items that had previously been, and this is particularly in the capital project status updates surrounding facilities. I think I'm looking at page 105 at the moment. But that there were several things that had been in previous CIPs that were not included in this one with the note along the lines of this is an ongoing capital program. Can I get a sense of what that means?
Yeah, so there are some that come off the list if, like, we'll start a project sometimes and, we'll fund it over the course of a few years, and then it gets completed, and it'll come off, and then we'll reprioritize and things like that. And sometimes projects will be on the CIP, and then for whatever reason, we may just, we'll study an upgrade or something like that, and then decide to take a different path because it's not feasible or something along those lines. So they do sometimes come off the list. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because I think what I was trying to clarify is it wasn't that this was being shifted to sort of, we were doing HVAC replacement and it was in the CIP, and now we're going to be doing HVAC replacement, but it's going to be part of our ongoing maintenance budget or something and not in the CIP.
No.
Okay,
It's all,
that's-
they're all pretty strictly, they're strictly CIP projects.
Okay. And then these are questions that I feel like we kind of touched on a little bit at the very beginning, but I just want to be really clear about them. So there is 1.2 million, I believe, in new operating costs identified. The vast majority of that is not coming from the general fund. Is that correct? Mostly it's airport and stuff like that.
1.2 million is in the upcoming biennium, and the 4.9 million that's over the full span of the CIP, most of that is from the airport. I can pull up that slide if we want to look at that table again. But I think a good portion of that 1.2 million is parks.
So it's parks levy, other things that's, yeah. And then the other piece was that there is a small amount of the actual capital improvements that are listed on here as general fund. Are those primarily maintenance items that if we don't do them, it's going to cost us more down the road?
Yes.
Okay, so it costs less to replace a leaky pipe than to clean up the damage caused by a leaky
For a
pipe.
failing roof.
Yeah,
It's going to
okay.
cause a lot more damage.
All right, and then I'll decide if I want to stick around later. Thank you.
Thank you. Siobhan Cancel.
Hello, it's my first time using the mic. Thank you so much for the presentation and for the new tool. I was able to get in there and play around and click on things. It was really nice. I just have a clarifying question, and maybe I'm missing it. So, in one of the slides on funding status, I see like there are funding secured for pretty much all the other sections except the airport. Is that because the airport does have like its own, I feel like it was touched on, maybe funding sources outside of this?
So Keisha could probably answer this more from a finance standpoint, but I believe that is where I talked about, and Keisha also mentioned it, that they are going to have to go out for a bond to fully fund some of the concourse improvements, and that will be coming back to council. So there is a placeholder in there for that conversation.
Add as well, some of that funding is grant funding, and we don't consider that funding secured until we actually have that grant in hand. So that's why you see all of that as identified instead of secured.
And then just one other question that I'm curious, and I noticed that in the process, there's public comment or input. How would one from the public get involved in that way?
So when you're, I think you're thinking of the process, the big circle that talked about all the different steps of how a project goes through. So there's going to be a lot of different ways. So I talked a lot about the planning documents and how some of those, like the TSP, will be coming up for renewal, and there's going to be a very formal public engagement process with identifying projects in the TSP. But there are other times where we are in the process, if you just want to give input on a particular project, say you have some thoughts about how traffic uses a particular street. Typically, neighborhoods get postcards, a year, 18 months, maybe even 2 years in advance of a project, which will provide you with the name and contact information for whoever is the lead staff person on that project. And you can always reach out to them with input on the projects. The earlier, the better, is very helpful.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. I'm going to let our online members know that just based on the order I see on the screen, I'm going to go Clark, Keating, Grove, Zelenka, and then Evans. So Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. I want to ask a very general question. I'm really trying to get at information, and I really hope that my question is able to be answered without engaging in a debate with my friend Councilor Zelenka, who I am sure will want to debate me about any number of portions on this, but I'm hoping just to get information. Now, our city engineer mentioned in the last part of her presentation portions of the CIP that deal with stormwater and other public trunk line type utilities that are associated with housing, specifically with regard in what you mentioned to Crow Road and other areas. Here's my question. Several times, Heather in planning has mentioned in front of council that 48% of our buildable lands inventory is unbuildable because of the lack of public trunk line type utilities, not specific development that are responsible for doing their own connecting to the public trunk lines that are available, but the basic infrastructure that's necessary in order to build a particular area with housing. Do we have sufficient master planning, at least, even if it's not funding identified in the CIP, to build out a portion or all of our currently unbuildable buildable land supply? And I guess that question's for Jennifer. I'm not sure entirely.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that question. So I can't speak to, I don't have the map that would go with the information that Heather has provided, but,
Right.
But I can tell you that we last updated our wastewater master plan in 2020, and we identified how to serve the entire urban growth boundary with wastewater. And then we've also been working with planning when they look at urban reserves, and we're on that team to look at how we would actually serve those properties in the urban reserves as well. So the wastewater master plan, which the projects that are shown in the CIP, Crow Road and the last CIP, are all from that wastewater master plan that was last updated in 2020.
So we have at least sufficient planning in place, even if it's not funding identified, in order to know what's required in order to build all of our currently buildable land supply.
Yes, we do.
That's very good news. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Keating?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. Welcome, Wendy Simmons, Budget Committee member, hailing from South Eugene's Ward 2. It's good to see you at the table. And it's nice to participate with Councillor Kaczynski. Serving as a city councilor. I have no questions or comments at this time, Mr. Chair. So I will follow up in writing if I do, and I will be sure to CC you, Chairperson Zimmerman, so you're in the loop. And thank you, staff, who got me on telephonically as well, as there were a bit of, as there usually are with yours truly, bit of a cover. I'll pass the torch and simply say thank you, and I'll continue to study up and follow up in writing.
Thank you. Councillor Groves?
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank you, staff, for the excellent work you've done on this plan. I've always found the CIP plan to be one of the easiest to follow documents that we peruse as counselors in Budget Committee. I'm very eager to see the airport progress. I mean, we're already past capacity out there, and I think it's really very important for our, not just our community, but our region and our economy, that we move forward on that as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you. I'm sure I'll have more questions later, but for now on the CIP, I'm very satisfied.
Thank you. Councillor Zelenka?
Yeah, thanks. No debate for Councillor Clark. He's probably disappointed. Great work on the CIP. It's always a good document to see and imagine what is going to be and visualize what's going to be happening in the city. Concur with Councillor Groves that the airport project's exciting, and eager to hear more about it and work on that project. Also, I was very encouraged by how much the climate recovery ordinance and the interaction with the CIP is integrated in, how much the CRO is integrated into the CIP. When I first made that motion years ago, we made incremental steps in integrating the CIP and into achieving our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. Still a ways to go, I think, but this is a vast improvement over the last iteration of it. And I thank you for all of that.
Thank you. And Councillor Evans? You're muted.
We can't hear you, sir.
Can you hear me now? All right. Yeah, great job on the report. I have one question now, maybe a couple more in the second round. Can you tell me how does the current situation with the private airport hangars fit into the long-range CIP plans in terms of the leases that they currently have and what is happening with those leases specifically, but also with the takeoffs and the landings that are critical to our airport traffic and our air traffic control hours at the airport.
Take that one. Thank you, Councilor Evans, for that question. So the current CIP program at the airport has no impact to general aviation hangars. And I don't know if that answers your question then, if there's no impact. But I'm also happy to talk with you about the leasing updates that we have been working on. We're still refining it, but I'm happy to talk with you more directly, since tonight we're talking about CIP and hangars are not being impacted by our capital improvement program at the airport.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I appreciate that, Catherine, because I wasn't sure if those private airport hangars had any effect on the CIP as we move forward.
No,
So we can talk about that offline later.
Sure, I'm happy to have a conversation with you, but really they don't have an impact on our capital improvement program.
Okay, good.
All right, thank you. Back into the room, Councilor Leach.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the presentation and all this work. Could you tell us the timeline for when the conversation about the airport bond would be coming back to council?
I think that's
I was
another
trying to flag you like
another question for you, Catherine.
So thank you, Councilor Leach, for your question. We have been doing extensive work with city finance, and we have a financial consultant that specializes in airport finance that we have been working with. And then now Central Finance is now engaged with Bond Council. So I don't know the exact timeline yet, but I anticipate there'll be a few touch points coming throughout the rest of this year, with the key piece being a couple of these projects have grant funds tied to them, and we want to make sure we're able to execute. One of them is our Concourse A project expansion. We asked for $14 million in ATP funding for that. We got $5 million, so we've got to bridge that gap. And then the other one is a baggage system that we have a TSA grant secured for. It's a very, very expensive project, and so we'll need to bridge the gap on that one as well.
Right, and for me, I guess in my head, it makes sense that this would be a bond that would go beyond the city limits of Eugene, since so many parts of our greater region utilize the airport.
Well, let me clarify, though. So this is a passenger facility PFC, so passenger facility charge backed bond. So it's not a taxpayer-backed bond. I agree.
Thank you.
We are a regional facility, but this is it is our passenger facility fees that will be paying for this.
Thank you for that clarification. Where does the microgrid fit into the funding piece?
I actually wrote a note because I anticipated this question. And so you probably saw in Keisha's and Jennifer's presentation that we have actually some really exciting energy projects coming up. And so the microgrid one is the $400,000 project. And so that's for a resiliency plan. And this is actually pretty unique because we had a lot of enthusiasm from a community group, 350 Eugene, who really wanted to put a solar array out and all of the things, but we need to study that first. And so they actually helped us write the grant application to the Oregon Department of Energy, and we obtained that grant, so that was great, very exciting. And then the other two are both $100,000 grants, and that one is for a planning project to add level 2 electric vehicle charging units to the long-term lot powered by solar, but this is the planning piece of it first. And then once we complete that, we can actually apply for the actual charging units as a grant as well. And then another one is solar power plant with battery storage, also a planning grant at this point, but that would study looking at having solar and then battery storage provide some clean backup power to the airport.
Really exciting. Thank you so much. I know when we took a tour last year, I was asking about the solar projects, and so this is a wonderful update.
And we still continue to monitor the solar panels that are on the quick turnaround facility for the car rentals. We feel like we need at least a year and maybe a little bit more under our belt to understand exactly what the solar capture on that's going to be, with the goal, of course, of just being able to power that facility.
So much. That's all I have.
Thank you. Jesse Maldonado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, staff. If you wouldn't mind running it back from the top, actually, so we can really digest it, that would be fantastic. Some of my questions have already been answered. One of the questions that I did have was kind of building on Wendy's question earlier about the bond measure, specifically the 2333 for the street repair and active transportation bond. Is there a sunset to those bonds, or are those continue, like, can we continue to add new projects as we go, or what's the deadline?
So it was a 5-year bond measure, so the revenue that's being collected will be only over 5 years. The project completion, construction can take longer than that 5 years, but yeah, so we'll only be collecting revenue for 5-year period.
Great. Thank you very much. That's all that I really had for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Moore.
And thanks, staff. As always, you made it pretty digestible, and I know it's not that easy to put it all together. I'll start with a question. So I'm going to focus tonight on the airport. Of the revenues there, it looked like about a third of it comes from federal sources. Is that about right?
Since you're sitting here, I'm going to just have you
You
direct
might as well.
airport
Might
questions
as well.
again.
Yeah. So our funding sources, and I guess I should have brought the pie chart over with me, but, oh, thank you, Stephanie. So airport construction, which I believe Keisha kind of described that a little bit more, that includes grant funds that we are either anticipating or we have been awarded, but it's not, we don't actually have the money in hand yet. And then also what we anticipate will be bond funding. And then there's, I think, a little bit of airport revenue, airport revenue thrown in there as well. The Federal Aviation Administration, those grants come in the form of a few different types of grants, the Airport Improvement Program grants, both entitlement funds that we count on every year, discretionary funds, that's a competitive process, and then through the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, we have the AIG funding, which is essentially, it is similar to our AIP discretionary funds because it essentially has doubled our entitlements over the next 5 years, but it's in that discretionary bucket. And then also the ATP grant, the Airport Terminal Program grant, falls into the bill of funds, and that is what the A Concourse Expansion Grant is from. So there's a little overview of that. And then our passenger facility charges, that's a $4.50 charge that is on every ticket, passenger stepping foot on an airplane in Eugene and flying out. And then customer facility charges, that is a tax or a fee rather on the rental car charges, and so that actually must be spent only on rental car facilities. And then the little teeny tiny pie up there is the Critical Oregon Airport Relief Grant, and that's through the Oregon Department of Aviation through their jet fuel tax that then is a program out to all of the airports in Oregon. Where this one is serves as part of our match to our FAA grants.
Okay. So I had a follow-up question. You've answered most of it.
Okay.
I'm trying to get at how much of those funding sources are restricted. And
All of
the
them.
grant funds, all of them.
All of them.
So all dollars
Correct.
related to this are restricted.
Correct.
Okay. Including the fee we charge per ticket.
Passenger facility charge, yes, it's in statute.
It is, okay, gotcha. Okay, in statute. Cool, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. So this is sort of a comment for the counselors who'll be talking about this a bit later. In diving through the airport master plan and the forecasting, the demand forecasting, it seems like there's something that isn't really explicitly addressed in those documents, and that's the concept of induced demand, right? Where our forecasting is based on expansion of the airport, and it's showing an increased amount of demand for flights and air travel. And so I just hope that you all keep that in your conversations moving forward, where we know 40% of greenhouse gas emissions roughly in the country are transportation, and of that, maybe a quarter or so are due to air travel. So those GHG emissions, from comments I think last year at our CIP meeting, we're not factoring in those GHG emissions into any of our reports because we don't have any control over how much an airline emits, right? And that makes sense. But we do have control over induced demand and how many more flights we're creating the possibility to have out of our city. So that's a long-winded way of saying I hope there's a robust conversation and we look at some data that we don't explicitly have control over related to how much greenhouse gas emissions really come out of our lovely city here.
I realize that wasn't a question, but would you mind if I just gave a couple of clarifying statements? So the airport master plan is a document from about 2018. It's due to have an update in about, thank you, 2027. But we have a refined study, and I don't know if you've been able to take a look at that. It's in that kind of that same website area as the airport master plan, and it is our advanced terminal planning study. And that one was completed in 2021, I believe. I have that correct. That has a refined aviation forecast in it. So the other thing about the aviation forecast, it is not a projection of let's build this so we can get more people. It is a FAA, it's very prescribed how you must do an aviation forecast, and it is only what we believe is going to be the trajectory no matter what we build or don't build. And then the other piece that kind of wraps into that is that right now we still have 26 or 29% of our local passengers driving up to Portland, to that other very nice airport up there. And there's a much higher greenhouse gas emissions from 80 cars driving up the freeway to catch a plane at PDX than there is if people stay local and fly local, which hence our campaign, fly local, right?
Could I respond to that real briefly?
Absolutely.
Just from my perspective, that's not the full story. The full question is the GHG emissions from flying or not flying. It's not traveling to PDX and then flying or flying out of here. So in my mind, that's the question I'm asking.
Sure, yeah, I do understand that. And then it goes to people behavior, right? Yeah.
And induced demand, hence my questioning.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, of course, there's plenty to discuss as you're suggesting here for your budget committee discussion as well. But I would just point you to kind of these more updated studies that than the master plan, which is a little bit old.
That ends my section, thanks.
Thank you. Zach Mulholland.
Thank you for the presentation. I've got 2 lines of questioning, and then I've drafted 2 motions that I think I'd like to bring back after we do our round robin. First, I'd just like to thank council for their hard vote on Monday. I know it was difficult, but we absolutely needed revenue in order to stabilize the budget. And I'd like to express appreciation to our firefighters that are doing a lot of work while being severely under-resourced. So my first question is, what would be the level of fire service that we would want in the future relative to what we have now? And what are the potential costs in terms of capital improvements, new buildings, as opposed to ongoing increased revenue for things like more firefighters?
So I would want the fire chief here to answer that question. We do have some software and modeling that we've been looking at that can help answer that question, but that's something we'll have to come back and provide to you.
Okay, thank you. The other line of questioning, you mentioned the climate recovery ordinance. About 30% of our emission reductions are supposed to model to come from a 3x increase in our biking and walking rates. What is our progress towards that goal currently?
I apologize. I don't have that information for you. I know that staff have been preparing some updates that we want to bring to council to talk about our progress towards the projects that are in the TSP. My understanding is the TSP was built around selecting projects that would, by building those projects, we would get to that goal. And so really the update is how are we doing on completing all the projects that are in the TSP?
Okay, I think that we were hoping that we would 3x our bike rates, but we actually had no plan about how we were going to get there. It's a little bit of hopium, frankly. But that being said, I don't think we have significantly increased our bike ped rates, but we have compared to what they were, but they were so ridiculously low that we're sort of starting from barely anything. And so how much money are we spending currently? I've been hearing a lot about broken sidewalks, people getting hurt, elderly folks trying to walk on our sidewalks. Many of our bike lanes do not feel safe to ride in. How much do we spend currently on sidewalk repair?
So sidewalk repair is a little bit of a tricky question. And the reason why that's a little bit tricky is because city code says that the property owners are responsible for maintaining their sidewalk. And I think that we can all look around and see that that's not happening at a rate that keeps all our sidewalks in good condition. And so last year, I did send a memo to council to talk about some different things that we're investigating on how to increase that number of doing sidewalk repairs. And we do plan to go back and do a presentation to council later this year to talk about the information in that memo as well as things that we've further investigated. And there may even be some things that we need to ask council approval to proceed with that our current code doesn't allow us to do. But really the difficulty is that our code says that it's the property owner's responsibility to maintain their sidewalks.
And then similar question, how much are we spending on dedicated bike paths?
So I don't have that answer right off the top of my head. There are some shared use path CIP projects that are in the CIP that I could pull up that page. And those, we do have some maintenance that, and I can't tell you what that number is, that also does repairs to bike paths. But then the challenge with the off-street bike paths is they're not eligible for gas tax funds. Gas tax funds can only be spent within the public right-of-way, and so we're always kind of challenged of figuring out how do we fund the repairs and even the capital improvements to the off-street paths.
And how much money are we spending on EV charging infrastructure?
So I don't have an answer to that question. I can follow up with you and get that answer.
I think we are putting a real onus in our climate recovery ordinance on increasing biking and walking rates and increasing the number of electric vehicles in our community. I don't think our budget reflects that. I think we're spending the vast majority of money continuing the current system. And so I have a motion that would try and take a very small whack at that, but I think it's a longer term issue that we need to address, that we're structurally massively underfunding the thing that we want to expand and continuing to fund the system that we say that we want to phase away from. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Konofsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a few small questions that were answered by the other questions. So just thank you for the new tool. I think any accessibility tools for our community is just really important as more and more people go online. So just thank you for that tool, and I'll wait until if any other questions come up.
Thank you. Thank you, as everyone else has said, for a really excellent presentation and all the work that went into it. From everyone who worked on it, I appreciated that acknowledgement at the end, because I know you three did a great job sitting here, but also a whole lot of people put a lot of effort into this too. So thank you all. I had a quick clarification on just when we look at the individual project one-pagers through there, most of them have like a projected construction date. And I just was curious, are those, the years listed there, fiscal or calendar years?
It's a little bit of both. Because as you know, I mean, the busiest part of the construction season basically spans 2 fiscal years, right? It falls in that May through October timeframe, and the fiscal year splits. And so sometimes it's kind of when we anticipate the bulk of the money will be spent in the construction, or it's also sometimes showing when we think we'll have all the money saved in order to be able to go to construction. So it kind of depends on the project.
Okay. And those are also, in most of those cases, projected construction dates. Those are not promises. It's, I
Right,
think,
they're projected, and they're probably pretty close of when the work will happen.
Add to that as well, the numbers that are shown in the tables on the individual project pages, they are by fiscal year, and it is based on when the funding is going to be budgeted. So that timeline of when construction actually occurs, it could also be funding for design or planning activity. So that's not exactly a construction start date, it's more of a funding needed date.
I was thinking there was a field somewhere else in the one-pager that talked about estimated construction.
And yes, I think that answers the question, because there's the table of which year the money will be spent in, and those are fiscal years. Those are where to look to see if it's in those first 2 years that's going to get folded into the upcoming budget, or if it's in the 4 outlying years. And then there's also a field for just estimated construction date, separate from that I think is there, it could be either kind of. Okay, that's what I wanted to know, and mostly for anyone else reading the document. And then I also think, just for the public reading the document in particular, and based on various conversations I have about projects in the neighborhood and things like that, I think it's worth sort of talking again about, often, yes, a lot of those dates are pretty accurate to when we will start, but also they are projected, they're not totally locked in, especially the ones that are more outlying. I'm going to use an example that I've had that I've had conversations about, the Golden Gardens Park sports fields, and just looking back at prior CIPs. That one, in the CIP 4 years ago, that listed the Phase 1 construction in 2025. The CIP 2 years ago said 2026, and the one now says 2028. But that is still there, and it's still in the CIP, it's still projected for 28. I've had conversations with people out in the Bethel neighborhood who just assume the project is canceled. So I don't know if there's a public communications piece that we could work on or not there, but just recognizing that when we're reading through these documents, that's an example of how they're estimated. And I'm not criticizing there. I know why that project has gotten delayed and what complications have come up. I've followed very closely. And so, but yeah, just wanted to use that as an example to emphasize that sometimes the dates are precise, but not always, and don't treat them as gospel.
Yeah, I mean, the projects are very early in development in the CIP, and so there's still a lot of estimating of when are we going to get permits, or if we're using grant funding, when is the grant funding actually going to be available? But yeah, it is our best estimate, given all of that stuff that we don't know at the time of the CIP.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Mayor Knutson.
Thank you, and thank you for this presentation. I hope that other people following along are finding it as fascinating as I am. My comments and questions are maybe clarifications, but also could be a question in here. So on the slide 61, the 2025 to 2031 CIP recap, first bullet point, 481.2 million in total capital. When I'm flipping back to some of the other pie charts, It looks like about 300 million of that is in the airport. And 192.6 million of that 481 is 2025 to 2027. Is there a simple way to describe how much of that 192 is airport, how much is transportation? Like what, in the next 2 years, seeing that very tall bar that says airport funding to be determined, where's that 192.6 million focused? Thank you. That was the slide I was looking for. I'm like, which one should I be flipping to?
And most of that funding is focused in the airport as well as a good portion in transportation.
Thank you. Related to that, and slide 6, and this slide is actually the perfect one to keep up there. That second bullet point about estimated operating increases of 4.9 million annually after completion of all CIP projects. Again, about 4.1 or 4.2 million of that increased 4.9 is airport.
If I remember correctly, I think it's about 3.8 or 3.9.
I was just tallying the Concourse C, the outbound baggage claim, and the Concourse A expansion to guess at that number. But similarly, that estimated operating cost increases, taking out the airport piece, 220,000 to mitigation bank, and about closing in on 500,000, $500,000 related to parks and open space. Is that an accurate summary?
Question. I haven't quite done that math in my head, but I think that is close.
Mostly trying to get a sense of scaling of where these dollars are going in the near term and which projects that, as people are wondering about what's coming soon or might be later, how that's working. I really appreciate all of this information and availability of staff to answer questions on the fly about even more information that we're curious about. I will echo some of the other comments that have been made in terms of my hope that we are able to see a larger percentage or an increase in the amount of funding that's dedicated to what's described as public works upgrades and capacity enhancement and safety projects, that 15.5 million and 4 million. When thinking about so many other goals related to people actually choosing to bike and walk, things like street trees make an extraordinary difference in that experience. They're good for us in about 50 different ways as a community, and we have huge areas of our city that also have almost no street canopy. And then some areas that have really fantastic shaded, cool places that are, 95% covered. So that is a priority, I think is one that has multiple ways of paying us back and also could encourage some of the behavior that otherwise we might have questions about how it is that we get there. The design investments piece of that, I think, are important. So thank you, and thank you for letting me chime in.
Thank you. In order to confirm and clarify where we're at with timing in the agenda, I wanted to double check. Zach, do you still want to make motions? I was unclear.
Yeah.
You do? Okay.
Yes, I would.
In that case, I want to clarify whether motions are in order outside of approval. I want a little clarification of exactly what our purview is and isn't here.
So we have had motions related to the CIP. It will depend on what the motion is. Sometimes they're, for instance, in the past when we've had motions related to adding GHG information to the next document and things like that, it depends on whether it's a funding shift within the CIP or more of a procedural. So it may depend on what your motion is.
Why don't I hand them to you to look at, and then we can go through them now or later?
Possibly now, possibly later. If you want to hand those over for review to clarify if they're in order, I'm now going to ask just a second question. If can I please see a show of hands of who wants a second round? Because a few people indicated a maybe, and I see about, okay.
Did I run out?
I see a short enough number of people wanting a second round. It looks like 2 in the room, 1 online. So I think we can do a second round while these are reviewed, and then if they're in order, I'll recognize you for that. So let's do a second round of questions, starting with Councillor Kaczynski, then we'll have Siobhan, and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you so much. This is getting back a little bit to a thread that we talked about like half an hour ago surrounding housing. I know that you all work very closely with planning and development as far as, what are the projections for housing? And I also know that our projections and targets for how many houses we feel we need to get built within the next 20 years just increased substantially. And some of these plans were written before those increases came down. Are you, as you're looking at how these plans need to be updated, what projects need to come next, considering that increase, working with the folks over in planning to know sort of that piece of it, and not just from the perspective of greenfield development, because I don't think we're going to hit all of those new homes with just greenfield, which would mean existing neighborhoods. Where do we need to upgrade, things like that? And that's all part of your planning process that goes into these plans we're talking about and into this. Is that correct? Yeah.
Sorry, the wastewater master plan doesn't actually talk about what order to do the projects in. It basically just shows, here are the projects that need to be built to serve the properties within the urban growth boundary. And so then we've been working with staff in planning and community development to just get a sense of where is the most opportunity. So looking at their projections of possible units per acre for different areas, and then also looking at what funding we have available to kind of figure out how can we get the most housing for the dollars that we're spending. And that's really like in the last CIP, White Crow Road popped up because we were able to get the most housing units for the dollars that we were spending. And so then that's how we identified like the 18th Willow Creek area as kind of the next project of how much housing we could get for dollars spent. To kind of get at your question about densification or kind of infill development. So there's a project in the wastewater section that's talking about extensions along key transportation corridors. So that's kind of what that's getting at. As we started looking around the city, we saw some areas that were within the 180, 160 feet that the code talks about, that if you're in that distance, then you need to connect to the system. But it doesn't necessarily go to the frontage of the property. And so there were some places where we're thinking that those were the places where like affordable housing might be more likely to develop. And rather than put that responsibility on those developments to do that 180 feet of extension, we created a project where we could actually do that work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Siobhan?
I just have a quick follow-up question that Zach inspired me for. So you said the sidewalks the repairing of the sidewalks is the property owner's responsibility. Is that like in most cases, all cases, a few?
Yeah, and I apologize that I don't have the code section right in front of me, but the code says that the property owners are responsible for maintaining and clearing the sidewalk along their property. And, and that is really expensive for people to take on. And I think just like your question illustrates, a lot of property owners don't really realize that either. And so this is where the work that we've been doing over the last year of kind of really diving into this subject and trying to figure out of how can we make this more affordable and actually serve the whole community and getting good sidewalks around the community. But it's a big issue.
And so if, so like I said, I wasn't aware of this. Does the city like notify if because there's huge cracks like by where I live. And so I'm just curious, does the city reach out to that property owner? Is there any sort of, responsibility or
Yeah, so we don't have necessarily a program that's going out and wholesale investigating it, or reviewing all sidewalks in the city, but we do have a program that people can put in a request, what's called a request for service, where they identify that there's a problem in a sidewalk area, a trip hazard or route problem, and that our maintenance division will actually go out and investigate that sidewalk, kind of look at what might need to be done to repair it, and they will notify the property owner at that point. And there's also some programs where the property owner can actually work with the city to do the repair of the sidewalk and pay the city to make that repair rather than go get the permitting and hire their own contractor to do that work as well. But we're looking at ways to try and make that program more robust.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Clark.
Thanks, sir. Eliza hit at my first question and asked a good chunk of it there. I was going to ask the city engineer if we have any kind of estimation, although master planning has been done for infrastructure, have we done sufficient planning as to where we might identify funding or a percentage of it that's been identified for funding for any of the projects required to make any of our undevelopable lands developable? And I would extend that to things that my colleagues Evans and Groves have brought up so many times. Also, those things that will serve industrial development in our area, that especially like on Clear Lake Road, that is not ready for the kind of development we need to have robust economic growth. Is that addressed adequately in the CIP in terms of how we'll get there financially?
So thank you, Councilor Clark. So it's not really discussed in the CIP itself. It's discussed in some other documents. So I think that it's part of the intergovernmental relations work that's been being done. For example, I think there's a legislative ask for the Clear Lake area that might be part of that. And that's how Crow Road got funded, is that was a legislative ask,
Right.
but we got funding through that. And so we have been trying to look for some creative revenue sources that we haven't used before to fund some of these projects, rather than just, I mean, the traditional way that the city of Eugene has done this, if it's not the developer building it, we form a local improvement district and we assess the property owners for the work. And so we're kind of looking for some more creative ways that we haven't funded these projects in the past. So for example, we've been working with finance to look at the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund as an opportunity to fund some of this work.
And to Councilor Kaczynski's point, we've just had a new thing dropped on us from the state in terms of now the need for us, the need existed, but the requirement that we build nearly twice as much housing as we had planned to. So I think I want to add to her voice that I think the appropriate capital planning for what's required in the portion of the budget to make sure that we have available ability to build the housing we will need is taken care of in the CIP. I also want to ask, in response to Zach's ideas, what's our schedule here for this? When will be the last time to make a motion for any changes to the CIP before it comes to council? I guess that's a question for Ty, but I don't know for sure.
Well, thank you, Councilor Clark. Tonight would be the night to make a motion on the CIP. The plan after this point is the Planning Commission is going to get an informational session, and then it will go to council for a public hearing and vote. What I will say is this does, when the CIP is approved by council, it becomes the capital budget that's part of the city manager's proposed budget that will be presented in April. So there's an additional time during the May budget committee meetings if there's additional motions or more information needed to support potential motions during that process in May.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a better answer than I had. I think that got a second round to everyone who had indicated they wanted one. Do you have a determination on whether those motions would be in order, one or either, or both?
So we also have our city attorney online who can address some of these. So the two motions, this is partly why we like to try to get these in advance so we can be prepared with it. So I'm going to start with your second motion first. The second motion is related to recommending the city council hold a work session on long-term needs for fire services, which I think fits in. Not saying you can't make that motion, it's not related necessarily to the CIP, and it nests in nicely with the motion that was passed Monday night to have a retreat to talk about long-term financial needs and long-term needs. I think we would plan to be talking about this as part of that anyway. And you could make that, Catherine can give you direction on when to make that motion. The other one about shifting funding, so the other one is about shifting funding from infrastructure for vehicles to infrastructure for sidewalk repair. That's pretty difficult to do tonight because so many of the projects have specific dedicated funding, and I don't know what that would mean and where we would take it from to put it towards sidewalk repair. So it could be that motion could come up during our regular budget process, and we would have a way to understand where we would take it from and where we would put it. So with that, I'll let Catherine talk about whether they're in order or out of order. I was just trying to figure out how to get at what you're trying to do. Back?
Yeah, I can speak to that. It definitely, since neither of them are amendments to the CIP, the proper motion that we would be making tonight would be a motion to recommend. It would be a motion to take action recommendation on the CIP, and then motions that would be amending that recommendation would be what I would anticipate would be the proper order for motions. And since neither of these are motions to amend the CIP to add additional language or anything like that, I wouldn't anticipate those happening after there's a motion on the table. So whether and as city manager stated, the second motion appears to be already kind of encapsulated into what happened yesterday. But that could be made after the CIP motion was made and voted on, if that's the desire. And the first one, I'm just looking at this as on a photo on my phone. I think that based on the discussions that will be coming back to council, once the CIP is a part of the city manager's proposed budget as your capital budget, that first motion seems to fit more within the discussion that you'd be wanting to have then, which is kind of how it kind of plays out, not because you're not specifically proposing a change to any of the project funding or whether it's included in the CIP.
Okay, it sounds like I need to follow up with city staff on how to be prepared to have that motion in April. And then if I wanted to make it clear that we definitely did want you to return to fire funding specifically, I could make that motion after the CIP passes tonight. I can make that motion after, I can make that motion tonight after that other thing passes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And with that then, I'll come back to our recommended motion to recommend the CIP as presented to the city council. Do I have a motion to do so?
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend the CIP as presented to the City Council.
Heard a second from Jesse Maldonado, moved by Ryan Konofsky. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I did not see a vote online from Councilor Zelenka. I'm not sure if you're still with us. Just want to give you a chance to jump in if you meant to vote.
Alan, wake up.
Saw you unmuting.
I voted by hand, yes.
Thank you. In that case, I saw a unanimous count in favor. And with that, before we move to our break, I will recognize Zach Mulholland.
When you need to remember.
I would like to move to recommend the Eugene City Council hold a work session on the long-term funding needs for expanded firefighting services in Eugene, including new fire stations and additional firefighters, and options to fund this need, including bonds, levies, or a fire district.
Point of order.
Yes, Councilor Clark?
Isn't it traditionally the case that recommendations for council outside of normal schedule and normal agenda items are done at the end?
We're going to do this one at the end of this segment, since we have a break in the agenda next, and then we're moving on to newly new topics. So I'm going to recognize the motion and see if we have a second.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Ye. Do we have any discussion on this motion? And I'm seeing Councilor Evans and Clark. No idea which order you've jumped in on. Councilor Clark.
I think I'm first this time.
Councilor Evans, take it away.
To Zach's motion, on Monday night, I made a motion that passed 8-0 for council to do a deep dive and a retreat into long-term fiscal stability for our budgets and going into the next 6 to 8 year cycles and then beyond that. So we are going to have a deep dive discussion about this, which will include fire, police, public works, the whole menu, just opening it up. So I'm not sure if it would be redundant, but I think that that will be a large part of our discussion as we have that retreat. And I assume that my other counselors all agree with me on that, since they all voted. We voted 8-0 to support that motion.
Thank you, Councilor Clark.
Thank you. I would vote no on the motion only because this particular subject matter, which I agree needs to be discussed, has two other parts that are already at play. One, Councilor Evans just mentioned how it fits into the larger budget and the larger discussion that council has already intended to have for long-term sustainable funding. But then the other part is the fire governance model that the subcommittee is still working on with regard to a recommendation to council about how to proceed, whether it be a district or whether it be an intergovernmental agreement. The subcommittee has yet to make a recommendation to council about how to proceed in that. So I would suggest those two are pieces of work that need to be completed before we're ready to have a more robust decision about budgeting with regard to the involved parts of that. Thanks.
Yes, I will say that I agree that we need to be having in-depth continued conversations about fire services, EMS services, and the needs there. And I think that a work session like the one described may not be the next step in that conversation. And so I wouldn't want to jump ahead and say we're having this before we've had the governance conversations, or continued, because they're already ongoing, continued the governance conversations before we've had some of these larger conversations about that we're having the retreat to discuss. And so I don't want my vote against this to be interpreted as saying that I don't think that those are conversations. I very much agree that there are conversations, that these are conversations that need to happen, that we need to be moving forward with them, and I believe that we are already, so.
Thank you. Next, I have Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. And Zach, I appreciate you making this motion. I certainly agree with what my colleagues have said about there's something coming up down the road to look at this, but I intend to vote with you on this measure because I look at the many years I've served in the fire service here, and many times we've been part of a discussion and then fire just ends up falling off the train. So I would like to have a specific um, specific discussion about this. In addition, I sit on that governance panel and we keep stalling out. I'm not even sure where the hangup is now. I thought all four counselors were kind of the same mind, but somehow it seems to have stopped yet again. So I don't have a high degree of confidence we're going to be bringing this in for a landing anytime soon. And so I think we need to have several tracks of finishing this off. So I'm not only going to support this, I'm going to enthusiastically vote in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach?
I think Councilor Ye is next, actually. Oh, I think we all know that there's an absolutely critical need to expand fire services in our community. I think we can see that for 40 years, the fire department has not grown commensurate with our community's growth to the point we only have one more firefighter now than we did in the late 80s. And that if we're serious about coming up with a plan to actually expand services and actually provide that funding, we should actually have a meeting to find the solution for that problem. And so I would ask everyone to please support this and have the discussion so that we can actually make forward progress and not continue to spin our wheels on something where it's literally been decades that folks have been left behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Councilor Ye.
Yeah, I just really wanted to quickly jump in and just explain why I seconded it. I understand we're having a meeting, a retreat, as we're calling it, but I can't imagine us having enough time at one retreat to discuss all of the budget issues. It's very complicated and there's lots of departments. The reason why I would support this is because I think the fire department is particularly unique and in a complicated situation, especially when you bring in our governance conversations that we're discussing. And it seems like having some dedicated time to be able to talk about the fire department would be beneficial, because then it would give us that other time that we've set aside to look into other departments that all need our attention and all need discussions around how to properly fund them into the future. That was just my thinking on it and why I was supporting it.
Thank you. Next in the queue is myself, followed by Councilor Leach. I want to say that I hear that I don't know all the pieces of where this conversation is going and in what order and whether a work session is actually the next step that makes the most sense. But given that this motion is only a recommendation, I'm going to support it largely philosophically. I've been on Budget Committee for 7 years, and we've seen so many slides about so many things. And there is one slide that still sticks in my mind more than anything else I've ever seen. And that was the first time I learned that the fire department has had 1,000% increase in call volume without increasing their staffing at all. So I'm happy to support this motion as a recommendation, really just to emphasize the importance of better supporting our fire department. So that's where I'm at on it. Councilor Leach.
Thank you. I actually have a process question. If this motion passes, how and when would it be presented to council? At what point?
So the way it's worded is it's a recommendation to the city council to have a work session. So I was thinking through that too, because I'm not sure whether that then means we would put a poll in for council to say yes to, and then the mayor and I coordinate the calendar, and so it would come to us. So I was thinking through that as well, like how does this work? But at this point, it's a recommendation to you, and then council has to vote on that.
Okay.
Point of order, if 4 counselors vote in favor, isn't that a poll in and of itself?
No, not based on your operating agreements for how you vote on a work session.
Perhaps an indication of how a poll would go, but it is not itself a poll. I'm going to recognize Councillor Groves for a second round and then move to a vote.
I am not finished.
Oh,
I
I'm
am
so sorry.
Chair. So I am generally happy to support any type of, extra information that comes to council. This topic is particularly important to me. I mean, in the past several, months, years, we've been talking about this fire fee. And I think it's important that we put this information into the community, that we are designating our time and attention and how to keep moving forward and ensuring the safety of our community. So for that reason, I will be supporting the recommendation, and then I'm curious on how that goes.
Thank you. I'll recognize the last remaining hand, Councillor Groves, and then we'll call a vote.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of correction on the facts. Zach, it hasn't been one more firefighter on the street since late 1980s, since 1981. I was here working as a line firefighter back then, and I remember the staffing well. I can tell you where all the people were. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we are ready for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hands.
Aye.
Counted 14 in favor. Any opposed? Any abstentions? I believe that's unanimous. Thank you. With that, we are going to take a quick 10-minute break to stretch our legs, and then we will be back for an update from the city manager and a staff presentation on our state property tax structure. Thank you. I thought 10 would mean 20, so you're actually ahead of schedule, and I appreciate it. We're gonna offer the floor now to our city manager, who just wanted to give us an update.
Yep, we thought it would be a good idea if I gave an update, especially on council's discussion from Monday night. So first, I'll just start by saying I share Ty's enthusiasm for meeting in person. It always feels good. I, so far, have not presented a single budget in person. It's all been on Zoom, so it's nice to know that from your perspective, I actually exist now. So I'm really looking forward to our full process in April or May. So what happened on Monday night, and I know you're all paying it really close attention and our staff are keeping you very well informed, but council majority did move forward the fire services fee. And the next presentation is actually going to give you a good reason why we're heading down that path and what some of the problems are we're trying to solve. But the fee, as proposed, generates $2 million for new fire services and $8 million in stabilization and moves those funds into a protected account that I see as being more of a utility model. And I do look at fire services being something that should be treated more like a utility, similar to stormwater and wastewater. Again, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Depends on infrastructure, really needs to be able to grow at the same rate as our community. And as we know, our property tax system hasn't been able to do that. But even with that, we still have a $3.5 million gap that we'll be solving for. So we're working on that now. And that's assuming that that goes forward. If that is indeed, and people were talking on Monday night about potentially referring this to the ballot, we're working on contingency plans for that. So when we come in April, we'll have multiple different plans in place to try to address those issues so that we can meet all the requirements to have a balanced budget by the end of the year and going into the biennium. So it'll be an interesting ride, and I'm glad we'll be in person to be able to walk through that. But I just thought if you had any questions about that, I would just give you that brief update before we jumped into a really great set of information on our property tax system.
Thank you. So staff will now provide a presentation on the Oregon property tax challenges with time in the next portion of the agenda for questions and discussions. Take it away, Maurizio.
Thank you, Ty. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mayor and Budget Committee. My name is Maurizio Badalico. I am a senior financial analyst in the city's finance division, and I will be giving you an overview of Oregon's property tax system. So here's the topics I'll be covering tonight. We'll start out with a few property tax basics and a brief overview of the system prior to 1990. We'll then get into measures 5 and 50, which drastically changed the system and introduced the limits that are contributing to the financial distress experienced today by local governments around the state. We'll also look at some Eugene property tax data and trends and finish up with a quick summary of the increasing costs of providing local government services. So let's start out with a few basics about the property tax system. Property taxes are governed by the Oregon Constitution and state statutes. Therefore, property tax reform would require action by the state legislature and a vote of the people of Oregon to amend the state constitution. The county handles property tax administration, including appraising most taxable property and assessing and collecting taxes due. Certain large industrial properties are appraised by the Oregon Department of Revenue. DOR also appraises certain transportation, communication, and energy utility properties through a program called Central Assessment. Taxable property includes all privately owned real property, such as land, structures, and other improvements. For businesses, taxable property also includes the personal property of the business, including machinery, equipment, and other furnishings that are not affixed to the real property. Oregon law allows many types of taxable property exemptions, and we'll take a closer look at some of those later. Before measures 5 and 50, Oregon had a levy-based property tax system, which means that a taxing district's levy was submitted to the county as a dollar amount. Each taxing district calculated its own tax levy based on its budget needs. Generally speaking, the full market value of property was taxable, and there was no separate definition of assessed value. The levy for each taxing district was then divided by the total real market value in the district to arrive at a district tax rate. Most levies were limited to annual growth of 6% without voter approval, but levy increases of more than 6% could be achieved with local voter approval. Measure 5 was passed by Oregon voters in 1990. Measure 5 retained the levy-based system, but added rate-based limits on taxes paid by individual properties. The limits are $5 per $1,000 of real market value for education taxes and $10 per $1,000 of real market value for general government taxes. These limits apply to operating taxes, but not to bonded debt levies. If either the education or general government taxes exceed the limit, then each corresponding taxing district has its tax rate reduced proportionally until the tax limit is reached. This reduction in taxes is called compression and results in millions of dollars of lost revenue for schools and local governments each year. Later in the presentation, we'll take a closer look at how compression works. Another impact of Measure 5 is that it shifted more K-12 education funding to the state. Local property taxes used to make up about 2/3 of K-12 funding on average before Measure 5, but that ratio dropped to just 1/3 after Measure 5, with the state making up the difference. Then Measure 50 was passed by Oregon voters in 1997 and transformed the system from levy-based to primarily rate-based. Each district's permanent tax rate provides critical operating revenue for general fund services. Today's permanent rates are essentially a reduced version of whatever tax levies existed locally when Measure 50 was passed. This cut effective tax rates by an average of 11% statewide from pre-Measure 50 levels. Permanent tax rates cannot be changed by any action of the district or its voters and remain as they were set in 1997, with a wide variation across similar jurisdictions. Measure 50 also separated property taxes from real market value, and instead, taxation became based on a newly created assessed value. For existing properties at the time, assessed value was established by reducing the real market value by 10%. For new construction after that point, the assessed value is determined by the change property ratio, which we'll discuss in more detail later. After the initial assessed value of a property is set, Measure 50 limits the growth of that assessed value to just 3% per year. Measure 50 also stipulates that assessed value may not exceed real market value. As a result, if the real market value of a property ever falls below its assessed value, the taxable value will be set at the lower real market value. Measure 50 also created a new type of levy known as a local option levy. Local option levies can be passed by voters to temporarily raise revenue beyond the permanent rate amounts. Because voters at the local level must approve these levies, they represent one aspect of local control over property tax revenue. Local option levies are restricted to 5 years for operations or 10 years for capital projects. These time limitations provide short-term remedies rather than long-term solutions. Due to their temporary nature, local option levies come with budget and service uncertainty, and operating levies must be renewed by voters every 5 years to maintain desired services. Local option levies can be approved in either rate or dollar terms and are the first to be compressed if Measure 5 limitations are exceeded. The implementation of Measure 50 has also resulted in inequities in the current system, and here's just one example. These two homes sold around the same time for similar prices, but you can see they have very different assessed values and tax bills. It all depends on when a property's initial assessed value was set and the local market trends where a property is located. This example happens to be residential property from Portland, but these types of inequities can and do occur across all property types across the state. So this chart shows statewide real market value and assessed value trends for the past few decades. The solid blue line at the top represents real market value, and the dashed orange line represents assessed value. You can see that the assessed value began in 1997 after the passage of Measure 50. The current market trend is captured in the blue line, but property tax revenue is limited by the lower orange line, which reflects the 3% assessed value growth limit plus new construction. The Lincoln Institute of Land Policy is a nonprofit research foundation. One of their research focus areas includes efficient and equitable tax systems. And their website contains a comprehensive database of property tax systems from across all 50 states. This is what they have to say about Oregon's property tax system. One effect of Measures 5 and 50 was making Oregon's property tax system one of the most complex in the United States. Although several other states use assessment limits, Oregon is the only state where assessed values do not reset to market value each time a property is sold. This publication was written by two of Lincoln Institute's researchers, drawing lessons from 30 years of experience with property tax assessment limits. This is what they have to say about Oregon's unique detachment from real market value. Oregon does not adjust assessments upon change in ownership, nor does it assess new construction or improvements at market value. With no periodic recalibration of assessed values to market levels, the Oregon system has gone the farthest of any in breaking the link between property taxes and property values. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and we'll transition to Eugene property tax data and trends, and we'll see how Measures 5 and 50 have impacted local property tax revenue. Let's start with a breakdown of property tax revenues received by the City of Eugene and the Urban Renewal Agency. This chart shows the various funds that receive property tax revenue. The general fund receives the largest share at 82%. The second largest share goes to the General Obligation Debt Service Fund, which is used to pay the debt service on voter-approved general obligation bonds. The city also has two funds for voter-approved local option levies, one for parks and recreation and another for library services. The final slice of the property tax pie goes to the Urban Renewal Agency, which operates the downtown and riverfront districts. This chart on the right takes a closer look at general fund revenue sources. Property taxes, EWEB contributions in lieu of taxes, or SILT, and service charges are the top three revenue types in the general fund. These three revenue types account for 85% of general fund revenues, with property tax representing the largest share by far at just over 70%. Other categories, a mix of smaller revenue sources such as right-of-way fees, marijuana taxes, state shared revenues, among others. This table provides additional details about the various property tax levies for the City of Eugene and Urban Renewal Agency. Starting at the top, the first row shows the permanent rate levy, and this is the only levy that goes to the general fund. Eugene's permanent rate has been frozen at about $7 per $1,000 of assessed value since 1997 and cannot be increased. This rate is slightly reduced due to Urban Renewal Division of Tax Calculations. We do not have time to dive into that process today, but there is more information in our budget document if you're interested to learn more. The next two rows show our local option levies. These levies must be renewed every 5 years, and you can see the duration of the current levy in the far right-hand column. The next row shows our bonded debt levy. Voter-approved general obligation bonds are typically long-term bonds paid off over many years, but one exception is our street repair bonds, which are on a 5-year renewal cycle similar to local option levies. And the bottom two rows show the levies for Eugene's urban renewal. When Eugene taxpayers pay their property tax bill, that revenue provides funding for more than just the City of Eugene. Here's the current breakdown of each property tax dollar paid by the majority of Eugene taxpayers. Starting at the bottom, schools receive the largest share at 47 cents. This includes K through 12 school districts, the Lane Education Service District, and Lane Community College. Moving up the dollar sign, 41 cents goes to the City of Eugene, 10 cents goes to Lane County, and 2 cents goes to Eugene's Urban Renewal Agency. If we break down Eugene's 41-cent share, the majority supports the general fund, while the remainder provides funding for voter-approved bonds and local option levies. This table shows City of Eugene and Urban Renewal Agency taxes for a typical Eugene home. This is defined as the median assessed value of a single-family home, which is currently about $254,000. Tax bill for City of Eugene and Urban Renewal Agency taxes for a typical Eugene home is a little over $2,100. So earlier I mentioned the Measure 5 rate limits and the concept of compression. Over the next few slides, we'll review the limits and how they're applied and how compression works. This table is from the Lane County Tax Assessor's Office and shows the rates that make up the tax bill for the majority of Eugene taxpayers. For reference, City of Eugene levies are highlighted in blue, and Urban Renewal Agency levies are highlighted in purple. I know there are lots of numbers on this slide, but I'd like to draw your attention to the total tax rate for each category. The total education tax rate exceeds the Measure 5 limit of $5 per $1,000 of real market value. So these schools are losing revenue to compression. The total general government tax rate is under the Measure 5 limit of $10, but it is getting closer with each new local option levy added. We are currently just 34 cents away from starting to experience compression losses. The potential revenue from a local option levy using the full 34 cents remaining under the limit would be about $6 million per year without triggering compression across all general governments in this category. And the final category is bonded debt, which is not subject to Measure 5 compression limits. Compression is computed on a per property basis. When a property's assessed taxes exceed the limit, the tax obligation is reduced or compressed until the Measure 5 limit is reached. Local option levies are compressed first, followed by permanent rate levies. Each corresponding taxing district has its tax rate reduced proportionally until the tax limit is reached. The amount compressed is lost revenue for the districts. So let's walk through a simplified example of how compression works using the education tax rate we saw on the previous slide. So in this example, the real market value of a property is $400,000. The education Measure 5 rate limit is $5, which equates to $2,000 of taxes. The same property has an assessed value of $300,000, and the actual tax rate that we saw on the previous slide is almost $7. The education taxes it would have paid without the Measure 5 limit is $2,083. So this taxpayer ends up being assessed the maximum of $2,000, and the extra $83 is lost to compression. So the primary impact of compression is revenue loss for schools and local governments, but there are other related impacts to consider. Compression essentially creates competition amongst taxing jurisdictions within the same category, and the actions of one jurisdiction can negatively impact the revenue of another. New local option levies, new special districts, and even urban renewal districts can impact compression. Here in Eugene, we do not currently experience general government compression, but we are getting close to the Measure 5 limit, and the potential for compression is certainly taken into consideration anytime we analyze new funding revenues. Another phenomenon caused by compression is that voters may vote in favor of tax increases they unknowingly won't have to pay for because their property already exceeds the Measure 5 rate limit. In the case of a new or increased levy, properties that are under the Measure 5 limit and not experiencing compression will bear the burden of paying for it. This has actually happened up in Multnomah County, where Portland voters approve countywide measures, even though many of their properties don't pay extra due to compression, while surrounding cities like Gresham end up paying the full amount even if the measure wasn't supported in their city limits. This chart shows statewide revenue losses due to compression over the last 25 years. The amount can be substantial, peaking at more than $200 million in fiscal year 14 and exceeding $150 million in the most recent year available. The amount of compression that occurs in any given year depends on how much the tax rate exceeds the Measure 5 limit and how much of a difference there is between real market value and assessed value. Oregon law allows many types of taxable property exemptions, and this is a summarized list for Eugene. Over $4.6 billion of assessed value is currently exempted from property taxes, which is almost 20% of the assessed value citywide. Some of these exemptions are locally controlled, and these are indicated by the blue stars. However, the majority of exemptions are mandated by state statutes. In a theoretical world, if all of this property was taxable, it would generate nearly $31 million of permanent rate revenue per year for the general fund. So if you look at the top row here, the first row of this table includes the University of Oregon, which is Eugene's largest individual exempt entity. Their expansive campus and prominent sporting venues, including Hayward Field, Matthew Knight Arena, and Autzen Stadium, cover more than 400 acres. The University of Oregon alone accounts for $1.6 billion of exempt assessed value, which, if it was taxable, would generate $10.6 million per year for Eugene's general fund. This chart shows the city's growth in taxable assessed value over the last 20 years. This metric is important because the general fund's permanent tax rate has been fixed at the same level since 1997. Therefore, growth in general fund property tax revenue comes from growth in taxable assessed value, which is limited to 3% per year plus new taxable construction. This chart is divided into 3 sections, starting with before the Great Recession on the left, during the recession in the middle, and post-recession on the right. The post-recession average growth has remained below pre-recession levels. On the far right-hand side, you will see that the most recent growth rate came in at 3.8%. However, the current growth rate would have been just 3.4% without the agency board approved frozen base increase. This action shifted taxable assessed value from the Riverfront Urban Renewal District to the overlapping taxing districts. The average annual growth in taxable assessed value over the last 5 years has been 3.8%. Another key driver of property tax revenues is the collection rate. The city does not receive 100% of taxes levied for 2 primary reasons. First, the majority of taxpayers take advantage of an early payment discount of up to 3%. Second, not everyone pays their taxes on time, and thus taxes owed become past due. The average collection rate over the last 5 years has been 95.6%. So one contributing factor towards lower assessed value growth is the declining change property ratio over the last decade. Introduced by Measure 50, the change property ratio is a countywide average of assessed value to real market value for properties within the same classification. This chart shows the change property ratio trends in Lane County for the most common property types, including residential, commercial, industrial, and multifamily housing. The ratios are generally trending down because real market values have been growing faster than assessed values. The change property ratio is important because it's used to determine the assessed value of new construction for the first year on the tax roll. After that, assessed value growth is limited to 3% per year. Another key point is that lower change property ratios mean that it now takes more new construction value to generate the same amount of tax revenue. This is how much new construction value it took in FY14 to generate $1 million of general fund property tax revenue in Eugene. Fast forward to today, and it takes significantly more new construction value to generate the same $1 million of tax revenue. Here are a couple of recent examples here in Eugene that illustrate the limitations caused by the change property ratio. These are both new student housing apartment complexes that joined the tax roll in fiscal year 24. They have similar real market values near $90 million, but the initial assessed values are about $36 million after applying the multifamily change property ratio of 0.4. Said another way, local taxing districts will receive property tax revenue based on 40% of the units in these buildings, but will provide services to all units. The change property ratio was intended to be an equitable way to add new property to the tax roll compared to existing properties. However, the result is that new growth doesn't pay for the government services that the residents who are moving in want, exacerbating local government's deteriorating ability to maintain service levels. Here's a look at our top 10 taxpayers in the current year compared to last year. I won't go through the whole list, but I will point out the most significant year-over-year changes. Shepherd Investment Group, a real estate investment company, moved up to second place after acquiring additional existing rental property. Valley River Center dropped to third place after appealing their values. It's also worth noting that the utilities and telecommunication companies on this list are centrally assessed by the state of Oregon and do not follow typical growth patterns. Central assessment can result in volatile changes in assessed value from year to year. The overall assessed value for this group of top 10 taxpayers increased by just 0.4% over the previous year. So here we'll look at the taxable assessed value that would be needed to address the $11.5 million general fund budget gap that we've been solving for. As you will see, the current property tax system makes it a difficult proposition to close this gap with property tax revenue. So in order to close an $11.5 million budget gap, an additional $1.7 billion of taxable assessed value would be needed. This is about 9% of Eugene's current taxable base. This amount represents assessed value, which means that significantly more real market value would be needed when considering the change property ratio. Here are some examples of how much new construction it would take to generate $1.7 billion of taxable assessed value. These estimates are intended to provide a rough sense of the magnitude needed to close Eugene's projected budget gap with property tax revenue under the current system. It's important to note that these estimates do not consider the increased expenditures that would also be necessary to provide general fund services to a larger population. The limitations of the property tax system result in revenues not keeping up with expenditure growth. There are many factors that add upward pressure on the cost of providing local government services, and a few examples are shown here. Inflation has been high in recent years, putting upward pressure on the cost of materials, supplies, and wages. Other personnel costs, such as PERS, continue their upward trajectory, and Eugene has experienced many consecutive significant biennial PERS rate increases. There are also unfunded state mandates, such as Paid Leave Oregon, and more recently, legislation passed during the 2024 session that creates additional costs for PERS employers. Aside from the challenges of maintaining existing service levels, local governments are also facing evolving service needs, such as homelessness, affordable housing, climate-related expenditures, and service expansion for a growing community. The result of this imbalance between revenues and expenditures is that staffing levels are not keeping up with population growth. Eugene's citywide FTE per 1,000 population was 11 back in 1996 before Measure 50 was passed, and it's just 9.4 today. Eugene's population has grown by about 55,000 residents since 1996. So in order to achieve the same FTE ratio today as we had back then, Eugene would need to add about another 265 employees to our current citywide footprint. Over time, the limitations of Measures 5 and 50 have contributed to a general fund structural imbalance where revenue growth has not kept pace with expenses. This issue is not unique to Eugene and affects local governments around the state, many of which have implemented alternative revenue sources to mitigate service reductions. The League of Oregon Cities launched an effort in 2024 that includes focus groups and public opinion surveys around the state to better understand how Oregon residents feel about the property tax system and possible reform strategies. This effort has the potential to lead to at least some degree of property tax reform down the road. There are also other levers to consider in addition to property tax reform as potential solutions to address the structural gap as we look to the future. As mentioned earlier this week, council passed a motion directing the city manager to prepare a council retreat on long-term budget stabilization strategies. And this retreat will be planned over the coming years to continue this, to continue this important conversation. With that, I will end the presentation and turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you for that excellent but sobering report. We have an opportunity now for committee members to ask questions or make comments. We're going to do this one just by a cue. We're going to skip the round robin. And I'm going to note we have 8 minutes left on our agenda, so if we have a lot of questions, then I'll need someone in a little while to make a motion to extend the meeting. But who wanted to jump in with anything? Councilor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I wonder, for a long time, Hynix was the biggest property taxpayer in Eugene and dwarfing everybody else by quite a lot. Can you tell me any kind of relative scale of what happened when Hynix at full operation as opposed to where we are today? For the sense of a comparative scale? I can't hear any audio if there's.
Thank you for the question, Councilor Clark. I rewound the presentation back to a slide. I don't have a number or percentage on scale, but what I will point out in this slide here that's on the screen.
I can't hear. There's no audio coming through. I'm sorry.
The microphone is on.
There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you for the question, Councilor Clark. Let me rewind. I put the slide back. I don't have a specific number for you, but the slide that's currently up on the screen, I will point to. Oh.
Now you're gone again.
Councilor Clark, can you see the slide on the screen?
I can see the slide. Yeah, the audio keeps jumping out as you go.
I apologize for that, but I will point you to fiscal year 11, and you can see the drop from when Hynix's value decreased was part of that year.
I can't tell if that's the audio or you stopping. I'm on.
Does that answer your question? What?
Yes. Well, kind of it does. My point was that one of your slides talked about relative development necessary, and it showed also, for example, Shepherd jumping up after the completion of their development. And so I'd have more questions about that than I believe we have time for. Secondarily, one of the things you didn't talk about prior to Measure 5 was other revenue sharing, for example, federal revenue sharing, that I'm aware that the county was the predominant benefactor of, but I wonder if that had an impact on the city when we stopped sharing, for example, timber revenues.
I am not aware of that.
The county lost about 52 million a year when we stopped cutting trees at the same rate.
I don't believe we ever received.
I wonder what the effect was on the city.
Yeah, Councilor Clark, this is your city manager. I don't believe in my memory that the city ever received any of those timber receipts, but I think we're all impacted when Lane County lost revenue and had to reduce their services as well.
And count on us for, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Kaczynski.
First off, I want to thank you for this presentation. This isn't the first time I've seen this presentation or a similar one. It was also done as part of the Revenue Committee. And I will say that I have shared this information with many people over the past year and a half. And almost everyone I've talked to has been shocked that this is the way our property tax system works and did not understand that this was how the property tax system worked. I'm paying property taxes on roughly half what I bought my house for. And so, and I have people who don't realize that. They don't realize that it doesn't reset when you sell your house. And they don't realize how that then in turn impacts the services. And so I think having these conversations, helping explain in such a very clear way how this decision that was made when I was in I was in elementary school for 5 and freshman in high school for 7 or 50, made well before I could vote, is now creating a situation where the folks in our community aren't getting the services and the support that they need from their local government because of this vote that was taken decades ago, before I think any of the budget committee members in this room, except for you, were actually able to weigh in on it. So, no offense. So again, thank you very much for the presentation and your work on this and your very clear explanation of how this all works. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach Mulholland.
A question and then maybe a statement. If we go to the slide that shows the assessed value versus real market value over time. Where would it be? Okay. All right. So compression is based upon market value rather than assessed value, correct?
That's correct.
So given that on average, properties assessed value is approximately 50% of its real market value, about what percentage of properties are currently in compression now or would likely be put into compression if we were to raise property tax rates?
That's a really good question. So right now, what I can say, because Eugene's general government rate is under the $10 limit, there's 0 properties in compression for general government. There is compression happening with education taxes, but I don't know how many or kind of what that volume is on the education side.
Okay, getting a sense of how close to if we were to enter compression, how quickly would things be compressed? I think there's probably a lot of values that are so far beneath market value that they would never hit compression, even if we were to significantly increase property tax rates.
The one thing I will say, compression is very complicated, so if we were to enter that realm, we would need to work with our partners at Lane County Assessment and Taxation to do some of that math. But what I will say, back to that top 10 list, some of those big companies that are centrally assessed by the state of Oregon, like Comcast, our #1 taxpayer, like Northwest Natural, their assessed value, the way central assessment works, their assessed value equals their market value. So there is no room. So as soon as we go over that $10 limit, some of those biggest taxpayers would start being compressed right away, day one.
Thank you. Couple questions and then comments. With regards to the permanent tax rate that was set back in 1997, can you speak again to that is totally unchangeable? The city can't change it. We can't ask voters to change it. So even if a voter wanted to put it forth of a ballot measure to increase their own taxes, they are not allowed to do that by law.
That is correct. It would need a change to the state constitution to allow local jurisdictions to alter their permanent tax rate.
So as the city looks to partner with the Oregon League of Cities on potential tax reform, I think this is one of the things that they should look at is allowing local governments to ask voters, can we change the permanent tax rate? Going to the assessed value question and the property tax ratio, I think you pointed out in your slide, Oregon is the only state where the assessed value does not reset to market value at time of sale, correct?
Of those that limit assessments, that is correct, yes.
And then with regards to the changed property ratio, so looked like it was about a 40% ratio for new residential. So if there's a $500,000 home, its assessed value would only be $200,000?
One clarification, the 40% was on apartment buildings. A single-family home, it's about 50%, so a $500,000 market value home would start out at $250,000.
So I think ask for a quick pause for a brief motion, and then you can continue your.
Mr. Chair, I move to extend the meeting by 10 minutes.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Eliza. Thank you. All in favor of 10 extra minutes? Thank you. My apologies, Zach. You may continue.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, are we taking no votes?
That, I did skip fast on that. All in favor? Let's actually count. I have 9 in the room. I see 1, 2 online. I have 11 in favor. All opposed?
Aye. I'm a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for catching me on that. Yes, we do have 3 opposed. The motion carries. We have meeting till 8:40.
So permanent tax rate, we should be allowed to ask our voters to change it. With regards to resetting assessed value to sale value at time, to real market value at time of sale, I think that's something that is a really basic fix that pretty much every other state that has this limitation, they work that way. So I think we should put our full weight and support behind that. And tied to that would be phasing out this changed property ratio over time because it's killing us. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our discussion on that topic. Thank you again, Maurizio. I just have a little bit of wrap up, and then I don't think I'll need the full 10 minutes, but our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, April 30th at 5:30 p.m. here in council chambers, and that is the meeting at which our city manager is going to present the 25 to 27 proposed budget. After that, we have 3 additional meetings planned on the Wednesdays of May 14th, 21st, and 28th, all at 5:30 here. That meeting on May 28th is the one where we will have our public hearing and committee deliberations and make our recommendation to council. So that is the timeline of what's coming up for our main budget cycle for getting that biannual budget passed. And with that, I thank everyone for your work tonight, and we are adjourned at 8:33 p.m.